just hours after the President of the United States gets on social media and literally tells the world that Canada should just give up, surrender our sovereignty, and become the 51st American state just to avoid a recession. Canada did something that completely caught the Washington elite off guard. It was a move of pure, calculated geopolitical dominance. Yesterday, Canada's Minister of Internal Trade, Dominic LeBlanc, marched straight into Washington, D.C. alongside a highly prepared Mexican delegation. But let me be crystal clear about this right out of the gate. They didn't go down there to bend the knee. They didn't go there to beg for scraps from the American economic table. They went there to formally deliver what might be the most absolute, undeniable, and frankly terrifying ultimatum the American political machine has seen in modern history. They formally requested a 10-year extension of free trade between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. But underneath that polite diplomatic request was a loaded spring. So right now, at this exact moment, you need to completely forget everything the mainstream, regime-backed media in America is trying to spoon-feed you. They are living in a completely alternate reality. They are desperately spinning a manufactured narrative that America holds all the cards, that Donald Trump is the ultimate deal maker holding North America hostage. But I am telling you right now, as someone watching the actual data flow, the pressure is 100% on Washington, D.C. Think about that for a second. The U.S. president throws a historical, embarrassing insult at Canada. And Canada responds by quietly handing them the absolute last lifeline they have to prevent a total domestic economic meltdown. If Washington makes the wrong move here, the consequences for the everyday American citizen are going to be nothing short of catastrophic. But here is the real question that nobody in the American press is asking. What exactly did Canada and Mexico put on that table in D.C.? And why is the prospect of a year-to-year trade review terrifying the global economic elite? Because I promise you, this isn't just about tariffs anymore. This is about national survival. Donald Trump is currently obsessed with this deeply flawed strategy of a year-to-year annual review for North American trade. He wants to weaponize loopholes in American financial law to slap sweeping, devastating global tariffs and sanctions on nations all over the planet. He genuinely believes that this chaotic, bully tactic strategy is the absolute best way for the United States to build a dominant trade position in the region. He wants to hold the Canadian and Mexican economies hostage every single year, dangling our own prosperity over our heads like a weapon of leverage to force compliance. But most analysts sitting in their comfortable DC offices completely miss this one massive, fatal flaw in his master plan. You see, a year-to-year review wouldn't actually break Canada and Mexico into submission. All it would do is guarantee a terrifying new reality for the American consumer. It would ensure a reality where Canada and Mexico proactively and severely restrict the amount of physical trade that actually crosses the U.S. border. And let me make something very, very clear to anyone who thinks America is entirely self-sufficient. The United States is desperately, completely dependent on the resources flowing from up north and down south. Look at the American food supply chain. It is incredibly fragile. 65 to 70% of the fresh produce sitting on American grocery store shelves at any given moment comes directly from Mexico. If you cut that off, if you even just slow it down with bureaucratic tariff reviews, you are looking at empty shelves, massive shortages, and skyrocketing inflation in a matter of days. But wait, because it gets even bigger. And this is where Canadian leverage is absolute and undeniable. Let's talk about energy. Let's talk about Alberta heavy crude. American oil processing plants, those massive refineries across the states, literally cannot function properly without Canadian oil. They physically cannot process their own domestic American light sweet crude unless it is mathematically cut and blended with the heavy crude continuously flowing down from Alberta. Canada If Canada decides to turn off that tap, if we decide to divert those resources, the entire American energy sector grinds to a devastating halt. The damage to the American lifestyle, the damage to the daily commute, to the heating of homes, to the logistics network that delivers their everyday goods. The impact on the lives of every single person in the United States would be felt immediately and brutally. It would be an economic shockwave unlike anything they've seen since the 1970s. So knowing they hold this incredible, undeniable leverage over the United States, what did Canada and Mexico actually do? Did they pull the plug? Did they walk away? No, they didn't. In a display of incredible moral and strategic leadership, Canada and Mexico walked into the absolute chaos of Washington, D.C. and offered them a golden off-ramp. They proposed a solid, decade-long, 10-year free trade agreement. They essentially said, let's make some concessions. Let's establish a real foundation of trade stability that we can actually build on for the future. They offered to build a bridge of unity and positive relationships right in the middle of the massive, toxic vacuum left by the negative behavior of this current U.S. president, his administration, and his most vocal supporters, and the fact that Canada is still willing to do this, to offer an olive branch just hours after being insulted and told we wouldn't be in a recession if we just became a 51st state of America, shows exactly the kind of moral leadership we are seeing from Canada and Mexico. The ball is entirely in the hands of the United States of America right now, but here is the terrifying reality that the US government desperately doesn't want its citizens to know. What happens if Trump says no? What happens if he refuses the off-ramp? A lot of people don't want to admit this, especially in the US. But Canada and Mexico aren't just sitting around like helpless victims waiting for America to make up its mind. While the United States has spent the last few decades bogged down in endless conflicts, focusing on creating wars in the Middle East, messing around in the Caribbean, and actively disrupting the global energy supply chain through aggressive foreign policy, the rest of the world has been waking up. Canada, Mexico, European nations, and powers all over the Indo-Pacific have been busy. We have been quietly, strategically, and efficiently building our trade off-ramps. We have established massive, robust trade networks with Southeast Asia, South America, and the European Union. We are actively consolidating our trade powers. What you are watching right now is the massive, historical uprising of the middle powers on the global stage. Why are we doing this? To make absolute sure that we never, ever again fall victim to the unilateral, erratic, and abusive decisions coming out of Washington, D.C. The United States has historically proven itself to be a deeply abusive partner in this geopolitical relationship. They take, they demand, and they punish. And let me tell you, the world has simply grown tired of being treated like a vassal state. We are tired of being the abused victim in that relationship. The days of America dictating terms while the rest of the world scrambles to comply out of fear, those times are absolutely over. We have other buyers. We have other partners. We have options. And the people in the United States need to wake up and understand that those times of unchecked dominance are finished. If Washington chooses ego over economics, if they insist on this chaotic year-to-year review, constantly threatening to tear up agreements, the supplies that Americans have historically and generationally just assumed would always magically cross their borders will disappear overnight, because those resources will simply be diverted. Canadian oil, Mexican produce, critical minerals, they won't go south. They will flow east to Europe. They will sail across the Pacific to Asia. They will head to South America. We have the infrastructure in place to bypass the United States entirely if they force our hand. If Trump refuses this 10-year deal, if he chooses to plunge North America into year-to-year trade chaos. It will lead to massive price spikes, terrifying currency devaluation, widespread job loss, and an era of economic uncertainty that will absolutely crush the American working class. We, as citizens of North America, and particularly the American voters, have to view a rejection of this deal as a direct act of betrayal by the US government against its own citizens, because essentially, that is exactly what it is. The political elite, the wealthy economic class in America, they might actually profit off this kind of market instability. They thrive in chaos. But for the normal, everyday working class person in the United States, in Canada, and in Mexico, these erratic policies create economic pressures that are actively breaking households. Look at what is happening right in front of us. We are looking at historically high rates of food insecurity across North America right now. People are struggling to put dinner on the table at a time when we are historically overproducing. We are growing so much food that almost 50% of all the food that actually makes it to American grocery stores ends up getting thrown out in the dumpster. It is a completely broken, mismanaged system. It is a glaring sign that massive change is needed, and that a stabilized trade agreement is actually what is good for the people of the United States and North America as a whole. But as these insults from the US president continue, as the disrespect mounts day by day, we have to ask a very dark question. How long until the national leaders of Canada and Mexico just say, enough is enough? How long until they decide to pull back on these off-ramps, to pull away the safety net that is actively designed to bring the United States back from the brink of absolute economic disaster? This relentless abuse of the working class, this rampant abuse of financial and monetary policy that is bleeding every single household dry, is exactly why we are seeing a massive, seismic shift in the political landscape. This is why certain political voices are suddenly rising up and gaining incredible, unstoppable traction. You are seeing the rise of politicians who fundamentally break the mold of what the elite deem acceptable. People like AOC, who, let's be honest, as a woman speaking truth to power in a deeply entrenched system, is constantly denied the privilege to challenge the establishment without facing massive, coordinated backlash. You see the enduring rhetoric of people like Bernie Sanders, who has been around forever, whose warnings about the destruction of the working class were laughed off by the corporate elite for decades, suddenly ringing painfully true to millions of struggling families. You see rising figures like John O., who might still carry a bit of that polished Washington, D.C. actor vibe. Yes. But his aggressive, direct rhetoric is exactly the kind of fire the people want to hear. You even see figures emerging from the veteran community, from the traditional MAGA base. People who typically wear the red hats, like Graham Plotner, beginning to speak out against this economic madness. There is a very specific, calculated reason why these exact people are being so heavily targeted and smeared by the establishment media. It is because they do not look, act, or speak like the traditional, captured, corporate-owned leaders that Americans have been conditioned to accept. They break the illusion. The people finally understand. The millions of everyday citizens realize that those who say they represent us, those who are elected to represent us, simply do not. The public is getting angry. The rhetoric is being elevated. It is getting more aggressive, more direct. And honestly, that is exactly what needs to happen right now. In Washington, D.C., we have to recognize that everything is performative. Everything is about optics. And right now, the optics are showing that entire generations, massive demographics of the population, are fundamentally switching to a much more direct and aggressive approach when challenging centralized power. We cannot look at this anger as a threat. we need to see it as a profoundly good thing. Because the current political apparatus in the United States has implemented policy that is so aggressive, so relentlessly damaging to the American people and their closest allies, that the public has absolutely no other choice but to respond with the exact same level of aggression toward those very political bodies. Canada and Mexico have literally drawn a map to economic survival and placed it directly on the desk in Washington, D.C. They have offered stability, unity, and a path forward that doesn't involve bankrupting the working class. But in the end, America has to make a choice. America has to choose whether it is actually going to save itself or if it is going to continue to fall to the volatile whims of a president and a completely captured U.S. government that clearly does not represent the interests of its own people. The era of unchecked American bullying is over. Canada knows it. Mexico knows it. The rest of the world knows it. The only question left is, when will Washington realize it? Before. Or after the grocery store shelves go empty? Tell me what you think in the comments section below. Do you think Washington will actually swallow its pride and take this 10-year deal? Or are they going to drag all of North America into an economic war we don't need? Drop your thoughts down there. Hit that like button if you appreciate the real story you won't get on mainstream TV. And make sure you subscribe because this geopolitical chess match is just getting started and I'll be here tracking every single move. Food for thought as always. Take care.